Well, once again, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, distinguished colleagues, let me please first thank the organizers for this splendid opportunity to come together, and exchange opinions, interpret existing opinions, and deliver documentary facts. The genocide of the Greek Orthodox Christians constitutes an integral part of the Ottoman Genocide against the indigenous Christians of the empire. The applied methods of destructing the millets or church nations, as the Christian denominations were paraphrased in Ottoman Turkish, were the same: direct killings during massacres, or indirect annihilation by inhuman conditions of compulsory labor, and during deportations which were exerted as death marches. In the initial phases of the elimination of Greek and Orthodox Armenian Christians, eliticides took place, that is, the mass arrest, deportation, and subsequent killings of spiritual, intellectual, and political leaders starting in the Ottoman capital Constantinople in March and April 1915. In the case of the Greeks, the eliticide was repeated by the Kemalists in the Pontus region in 1921. Another distinct feature of the Ottoman genocide was the widespread massive use of sexualized violence and the enslavement of women and children. As a German observer noted in 1917, slavery, although officially abolished at that time, saw its revival during the First World War, when Christian women of Ottoman nationality were, quotation, publicly traded in Mesopotamia, often as cheap as a goat, end quote. With one exception, 4 of the 5 criminal acts that the UN Convention defines as genocide were commonplace in the Ottoman case. Raphael Lemkin, the main author of the convention, had noticed these crimes both in the Greek and in the Armenian context. In his autobiography, Lemkin classified the Ottoman genocide as religious genocide. Some later authors followed him. In view of the gender-differentiated and gender-selective treatment of Christian men and women, it is indeed tempting to interpret the Ottoman genocide within the framework of traditional Islamic jihad, the killing of men capable of military service, the death marches of the rest of the population, and in particular, the enslavement of women and children are indeed part of this religiously motivated tradition. However, the Ottoman genocide took place in a period of transition to the modern nation state. Therefore, it also carries the mixed forms typical for such periods, including elements of the modern genocide, which no longer distinguishes between men and women. Indicative of such universalist approach is the insistence of Ottoman provincial decision makers, for example, in the provinces of Diyarbakir and Bursa, on the indiscriminate deportation of women as well. The motives for genocide are never monocausal. The causes behind the Ottoman genocide were in particular complex. The 2 major factors that drove the Muslim elites into genocidal radicalization were economies and demographic changes after massive Muslim immigration and territorial losses. As the table of the Turkish demographer Kamal Kerpat reveals, the share of Muslims in the Ottoman Empire was about a third of the overall population in the early 19th century. After the immigration of up to 7 million Muslim refugees since the late 18th century, at the turn of the 19th century, the proportion of Muslims was nearly equal to that of non-Muslims. Such balanced situation seems to have prompted the Muslim elites to seek for a durable dominance. After the Chauvinist Committee for Union and Progress, or Ittihadist, had in 1908 overthrown the reactionary Sultan Abdülhamid II by a military coup d'etat, the new rulers developed the idea to stabilize the collapsing empire by cultural homogenization, or, as it was paraphrased at that time, by Islamization. That catchword, Islamization, related also to commerce and entrepreneurship, which were predominantly exerted by non-Muslims, while Muslims were traditionally prohibited from interest rate business. The first and main victims of the boycotts and economic repressions that were intended to drive non-Muslim traders and industrialists into bankruptcy, suicide, or exile were the Greek Orthodox Christians. Deportations of Ottoman Christians were first implemented during the Balkan Wars of 1912 and 13 in eastern Thrace, where the regime experimented with two types of expulsions. While cross-border expulsions into adjacent Greece resulted in the return of Ottoman Greeks after the war, deportations into Central Asia with death rates of near to 50% proved as a more effective means of destruction and were subsequently largely applied in following years. Until summer 1914, about 315,000 Greeks were expelled or massacred en lieu in eastern Thrace alone. Of these, 119,000 were deported to central Anatolia, where 46,000 died from diseases or during forced labor. The Ottoman authorities confiscated the possessions of the expelled, of the deportees, and slave laborers. The expulsion of Greeks from Western Anatolia began as early as 1913, but the final decision fell only after Ismail Enver was appointed war minister in January 1914. The Greek Ottoman coastal population was now regarded as a high security risk. On the 14th of May 1914, the Unionist Minister of the Interior, Mehmet Talat, ordered all the Greek settlements between the Dardanelles and Chesme to be cleansed by terror and settled with Muslim refugees from the Balkans. Already 2 months later, in mid-July 1914, Said Halim, the Ottoman head of government, informed the German ambassador about the quotation, total removal of the Greek population from the littoral of Asia Minor, end quote. At this stage, the Ottoman Greeks were considered to be internal enemies in dehumanizing speech called internal tumors. Deportations of Rumlars continued throughout the Great War. The focus was now on the Pontus area and adjacent regions. The Russian military occupation of the East Pontus only temporarily interrupted the genocidal procedure. By end of January 1917, the German head of government, Chancellor Bethmann-Hollweg, concluded, quotation, "The indications are that the Turks plan to eliminate the Greek element as enemies of the state, as they did earlier with the Armenians. The strategy implemented by the Turks is of displacing people to the interior without taking measures for their survival by exposing them to death, hunger, and illness. Their abandoned homes are then looted and burned or destroyed. Whatever was done to the Armenians is being repeated with the Greeks," end quote. The period from 1919 to 22 marks the final and most destructive phase. The Sultan's government only half-heartedly collaborated with the Allies in the legal prosecution of those who were considered politically responsible for the extermination of the Ottoman Armenians and Greeks during the First World War. But when it became obvious after the Treaty of Sèvres that the Allies intended the partitioning of the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman willingness for collaboration dwindled rapidly. Second, there was an open antagonism between the imperial government at Constantinople and the rebellious nationalist government at Ankara that emerged in May 1919 under its charismatic and successful leader Mustafa Kemal. Mustafa Kemal, who soon started to openly fight both the Ancien Regime of the Sultan and the Allied occupiers in the name of liberty and anti-imperialism. Since May 1919, killings, massacres, and even deportations were committed under the pretext of the Kemalist so-called Liberation War, with the clear aim of preventing the repatriation and resettlement of surviving Armenian and other Christian deportees, and to achieve the extermination or expulsion of the remaining Greek residents. Public insecurity remained an ardent issue, for likewise politically and criminally motivated highwaymen and bandits continue to threaten, rob, and kill primarily the Greek population. Together with the continued destruction of the Pontus Greeks, the massacres in the densely populated multi-ethnic district of the Yalova Peninsula throughout 1920 and 21, and the seizure of the undefended Ionian capital Smyrna in September 1922 represent key events during that period. The differences in the approach against the two quantitatively largest Christian ethnic groups of the Ottoman Empire therefore did not consist primarily in the methods, but in the speed of the annihilation. The annihilation of the Ottoman Armenians lasted 19 months, that of the Greeks 10 years. With the exception of the third and last phase in the years 1919 to 22, the action against members of the Romilet was regionally limited, mainly to Eastern Thrace, Ionia, and the Pontus region. For reasons of time, I will leave out of consideration the question of whether genocidal measures against Ottoman Christians can be spoken of even before the Balkan Wars. Only this much is indicated here tentatively, that I do not regard the massacres of the years 1894 to 1896 as extermination measures in the sense of the Genocide Convention. They did not aim at the complete annihilation of Armenians or other Christian denominations, but at their subjugation by deterrence. Under the conditions of war-related massive flight, forced resettlement, and dispersion of ethno-religious entities, it is very difficult to deliver reliable estimates of the number of victims. The methodological difficulties already begin with the number of Christian denominations. In the Berlin Treaty of 1878, which obliged the Ottoman Empire to undertake administrative reforms in the 6 provinces inhabited by Armenians, immediately caused the Ottoman statistics to become highly politicized. From then on, Ottoman authorities attempted to downscale the number of Christians, especially that of the Armenians and Greeks. The result was, among other things, that European geoscientists added around 25% to the Ottoman data on Christians. The Christians also contributed to the demographic confusion by often concealing the birth of male children in order to evade taxes. The population statistics were based purely on religion, that is, the Muslims as a whole, were compared with single non-Muslim religious communities. Far into modern times, the Ottoman Greeks did not regard themselves as Hellenes or Hellenes, that is, as ethnic Greeks, but as Romans and descendants of the Eastern Romans or Byzantines. At times, all Orthodox Christians of the Chalcedonian direction were counted to the religious nation of the Rumlar, including Orthodox Albanians, Bulgarians, and others. Depending on the source or author, estimates of the total number of Rumlar vary almost by the factor 2, that is from 1,800,000 according to Wikipedia to over 3 million according to German and Greek authors. A mean value of 2.5 to 2,700,000 seems appropriate here. The total figure of Ottoman Greeks deported during the First World War from Thrace and Asia Minor into the Ottoman interior or to Greece varies even by the factor 3.4. While the Ecumenical Patriarchate and various US-based relief organizations estimated that about 500,000 Ottoman Greeks had been deported during the World War, in June 1916, the Hellenic Foreign Office gave an estimate of 1.5 million deportees. According to a cable message of early June 1918 from Athens to the Hellenic legation at Washington, half of these deportees perished, quotation, from torture and illness, end quote. A team of American researchers, followed by the recent Canadian genocide scholar Adam Jones, established in the early post-war period that the total number of Greeks killed may approach 900,000 people. Although the number of scientists and political decision-makers who regard the crimes committed against the Ottoman Greeks as genocide has been increasing over the last 2 decades, there are still numerous others who make clear differences between the Armenians and partly also the Syriacs on the one hand, and the Greeks on the other. For ethical as well as international legal reasons, however, a paraphrasing of the crimes committed against the Greeks as ethnic cleansing must be categorically rejected because this term originates from the language of the perpetrators, and it has no connotations under international law. Also to be rejected are speculations about a ranking of alleged dangerousness of victim groups in which the Armenians are placed at the top, and the genocide committed against them is explained with their allegedly greater dangerousness. In doing so, it is overlooked how highly speculative and subjective the perceptions and justifications of genocide are. De facto, however, the Greeks were regarded by the early Ottoman rulers as representatives of the newly defeated Byzantines,
Ms. Hofmann,
especially after the capture of Constantinople, which is annually celebrated in Turkey until today. Because the Rumlar were so mistrusted, they had to settle far away from the city walls. The Armenians, on the other hand, were privileged in the same period when the sultans subordinated the other pre-Chalcedonian and Oriental churches to them. The Ottoman sultans perfectly controlled the principle of rule divide et impera. And to quote another example taken from the early 20th century, in 1915, in spring 1915, on the same day when the order came that Armenian servicemen in the Ottoman army had to be disarmed, War Minister Enver praised the Armenians and wrote an address to the Armenian Patriarch in Constantinople, where he praised the Armenians once again for their loyalness, hinting at the often used expression, the loyal nation. The millet nation was the loyal nation. In conclusion, let me remind you that the genocides committed during the two world wars of the 20th century were committed by serial and repeat offenders. In this respect, the last decade of Ottoman rule would not only deplore the annihilation of the Armenians, and for the period 1938 to 1945, not only the annihilation of the European Jews. Both Armenians and Jews had fellow victims, and these deserve same attention in science, in memory and history policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Hofmann, for your... Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ, κυρία Hofmann, για την ενδελεχή σας παρουσίαση. Θα περάσουμε στον επόμενο ομιλητή, στο διδάκτορα νομικών επιστημών, κύριο Βασίλειο Μεϊχανετζίδη, ο οποίος είναι συνεπιμελητής του αγγλόφωνου τόμου «Η Γενοκτονία των Ελλήνων» της Οθωμανικής Αυτοκρατορίας, με θέμα «Όψεις της Γενοκτονίας των Ελλήνων στην Οθωμανική Αυτοκρατορία 1913-1923».
Πριν από 100 περίπου χρόνια, οι Οθωμανικές αρχές, υπό το νεοτουρκικό καθεστώς της Επιτροπής Ενώσεως και Προόδου, αποφάσισαν, σχεδίασαν και υλοποίησαν σε βάθος δεκαετίας την εξόντωση του αυτόχθονος χριστιανικού πληθυσμού της Οθωμανικής Αυτοκρατορίας. Από το 1913, αν όχι νωρίτερα, οι Οθωμανικές αρχές προέβαιναν συστηματικά, προγραμματικά, σε διάφορες πράξεις γενοκτονίας κατά των αυτοχθόνων χριστιανικών λαών, Ελλήνων, Αρμενίων, Ασσυρίων, Αραμαίων. Οι πράξεις αυτές έλαβαν χώρα υπό διάφορες μορφές και σε κάπως διαφορετικούς χρόνους, αλλά κατά το μάλλον ιητών, για τους ίδιους λόγους, με κάποιες ελάχιστες διαφοροποιήσεις για κάθε μία από τις τρεις γενοκτονικές περιπτώσεις. Σύμφωνα με τη θεώρηση πολλών γενοκτονολόγων, οι γενοκτονίες αυτές